So today we have got Cole Watts and Stephen Medley, both from Stages of Recovery in Lubbock, Texas. They're doing some great things down there, and I know that they've got a lot of great information for us. So, gentlemen, I'm going to kill my camera. It is all you guys.
Well, hello there. My name's Steve Medley. I'm with Stages of Recovery here in Lubbock. We have two locations, one in Lubbock, Texas, and one in Waco, Texas. I am the CEO. I guess I'm one of the founders. Cole Watts is here with me. He's also one of the founders, and we are just really excited about sharing some of our experiences and strengths and how we can help guide you guys in helping everybody achieve recovery for life. Cole just left the screen. I was just about to introduce him. Cole, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Cole Watts. I'm the one of the clinician owners here at Stages of Recovery. So we got a few different co-owners, but I'm the one who's a social worker. I've got my master's in social work, and in Texas that qualifies me to be a licensed master social worker. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor, certified trauma professional. Actually, let me just move ahead and y'all can see a little bit about me. Certified clinical trauma professional. I'm trained in EMDR, which is a type of, traditionally it was used for trauma treatment. But a bunch of other things, you could read about it. Check out my LinkedIn page. There's some more information on there if you really want to. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time bragging about myself. I would, but I don't have to. So the next one's about Steve here, and I'll glance that up, and then we'll get started. But I've been with Steve, and this is kind of an interesting opportunity for Steve and I. We haven't done this in a long time. We've grown this into a bigger business than it was when we started, that's for sure. And so Steve and I used to do stuff like this all the time together, and now we don't do it as much. We kind of go into our own separate little cages and do our work from there. So it's nice to be back together and presenting with Steve and kind of being tag team back again. Yeah. So I'm going to give it back to Steve, and we'll get started on the actual nuts and bolts of the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Cole. So the purpose of our presentation really is just to talk about a couple of different things. One is to make sure you guys understand what we believe is a firm foundation of recovery. We're going to go over the continuum care model. We're going to talk about how is long-term recovery defined, what can hinder the long-term process, what's needed to create recovery for life, how does treatment and sober living create this opportunity, the different types of treatment options, what types of housing options are out there, and how it actually worked for Cole and I. This is something I think we're both really passionate about. I mean, we all know what a foundation is. A foundation is the bedrock of how we build our house. And a lot of the times I give the guys here an analogy of our recovery has got to come first. So we have to have the mindset that at any cost, we can't count the cost of what our recovery looks like. And so if that means that we have to let go of old friends, or we have to start new practices, new hobbies, then those are just some of the things that we have to do. So a foundation is a load-bearing part of building. Oh, it's kind of hiding. Let me move this thing here. Oh, look at that. I didn't know that. It's a load-bearing part of a building, typically below ground. It's a footing, a base, a substructure. It's an infrastructure. It's the underpinning. So basically what we talk about here at Stages is we want to help them build the foundation, and then you have another wall that you can start building your house on, and maybe that wall is your school. Maybe there's a wall that's your family. Maybe there's a wall that's a job or a career, something along those lines. So that's what we're talking about when we're trying to build a foundation, because at the end of the day, life has ups and downs. And if we had a tornado to come through and rip through our life, we lost a girlfriend, a friend passed away, we didn't get to keep our job, we would still have our recovery. Because whenever you see, especially you and the guys in Oklahoma, y'all know this, you see the devastation after a tornado, and really the only things you see left are just foundations. And that's just something that we can build back on. So Cole, you want to go to the next slide? So when we're talking about the continuum of care and development issues, there's a couple of different things that we want to look at. So there's a residential level of care. And in this residential level of care, we're going to talk about the client's going to learn about personal safety, emotional security. So it's more about internal components and how do we deal with how we're feeling and different components of that nature. Then there's also the next step is going to be our intensive outpatient level, which you're talking about emotional security, a sense of identity. And a lot of the times in early recovery, we're still trying to develop who we want to be versus who we are, who we became in our active addiction. So developing a sense of identity is important when we're going out into the new world, because we don't want to hold on to our old ideas or our old beliefs. We just want to have a new vision, I guess, a new foundation. Immersion in the program. I like to think of this as like going all in, diving into the deep end. And this gives us a sense of a new sense of identity. I remember for myself, when I first got sober, I had to really recreate who I was. And that wasn't really entirely easy, but it gave me I don't know, it just helped me change the way I viewed different situations. Cole, you want to move on? The next part? So long-term recovery is defined as 5 years or more, okay? The longer that we're in recovery, the better chance that we have of obtaining the long-term recovery quotes, right? Myself, I got sober when I was 19. I remember when the 5-year mark came around, and it was really difficult for me because things started to get really monotonous and the same and old. And so I really had to shake some things up. But long-term recovery is not, I guess it's not as easy to obtain, but it's basically defined as 5 years. Go ahead, Cole.
Sorry, I think this is where I take over. So creating long-term recovery. So one of the biggest areas that's been proven through evidence and research seems to indicate that resilience is one of the biggest factors that we can. It's a big deal for kids and adolescents as they're growing up, and especially in high stress, low socioeconomic areas. They found that the child's ability to adapt to his or her environment through resilience is one of the biggest factors to contributing to success and the likelihood of getting out of that environment. So resilience is just basically, can you thrive during periods of high stress? And so anytime somebody's getting into recovery, we consider that a period with high levels of stress. And so is the resilience going to rise up to match that level of stress that they're going through? And so as a result of that, high levels of stress indicate high levels of relapse. And so one of the things that's really important when you look at treatment and recovery housing and some of those other things and the long-term approach to treatment is that it gives us more opportunities to insulate the client as they're going through multiple chances for stressful situations, right? Because really when it comes to it, one of the things that I always like to say is we could teach somebody how to stay clean and sober whenever they're like, if every time I feel like I overdraw my bank account, I feel like getting high, right? We could teach somebody how to cope with that and say, all right, here's some coping skills that you can use so that whenever you overdraw your bank account, you don't feel like getting high. or we could just teach them not to overdraw their bank account. And then we don't worry about having to teach coping skills about wanting to get high over it. So it's really a matter of how do we alleviate some of that stress and build resiliency around some of those things. It's the same slide. I couldn't get it to take out. Resilience in long-term recovery, there's a few ways that we build this. So there's like anytime that somebody starts to take these new ideas that they've learned in recovery and they integrate them into normal, regular everyday life, that's one way that clients build resilience, and families for that matter. So once that new idea integration has happened and they've started to take some of those new ideas and really practice them, then they feel empowered and they realize that this is something that I can actually do, and it starts to empower some, rather than hearing those new ideas coming in and saying, okay, I'll try that thing. Now I feel empowered to try my own new ideas. And then those on my own new ideas that came kind of internally have given me a greater foundation again with which to build off of. And it gives me the opportunity to, or just makes me feel more empowered. And I know that I can continue to build on that and do good things with the sense of autonomy, I guess is really the big word there, that new sense of autonomy that I feel. And then again, as I continue to grow through that empowerment, I get more and more autonomy. I realize that I have these new ideas that are really building a foundation here. Then that helps to build resilience because those are counteracting against the stress that's coming into my life. So there's a few different ways that treatment and sober living, I kind of touched on it there just a minute ago, but part of creating resiliency through sober living and treatment or recovery housing treatment is there's a few different things. One is that there's social support. So the community itself acts as a social support system, which we know is really important. If somebody, the old saying around 12-step groups is that if you hang around the barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. That doesn't necessarily apply in my case, but in most cases that does apply. And so the idea being that if I hang out with somebody who's smoking weed often enough, and I really like smoking weed, but I'm trying not to, the odds are that I'm probably going to end up smoking weed eventually. So if I can create a new social support group that values the same things I do, one of which being maintaining abstinence, then even better, right? So we do that through a bunch of different ways. You can see there on the screen, 12-step meetings, going to exercise classes, being a part of a spiritual organization. Same thing looks like similarly as we move on into just being structured. We're not as big into structure here at Stages as we are accountability, but structure does play a role in what we do. There's some limited rules. We have some closed-handed rules and open-handed rules. So we have flexible rules and we have some hard and fast rules, so everybody's got a curfew when they come in. Everybody has to limit their visitors when they come in, things like that. So there is some structure, but at the same time, what good is structure if we don't allow people the opportunity to try new things, stay out a little bit later eventually once they've earned that privilege, maybe test the boundaries of some of the things that we might not think is a very good idea, but if we're there to help them and support them, hold them accountable to what they want, then we're there to help them through that stressful situation, help them build that resiliency. And then the last thing is identity. I think that so much of, I know for me personally and a lot of the clients that we talk to, so much of our life and our identity while we're using drugs and alcohol is centered around using those drugs and alcohol. Right. And so if I'm a pothead, then I'm a pothead and I kind of really identify with that. Or if I am a partier, then I'm a partier and I really identify with that. And that feels like that's my identity. That's who I am. I get these kinds of girls. I go to these kinds of parties. I do these kinds of drugs. Right. And that becomes part of who I am. And when you take that away from me, now who am I? I don't know who I am anymore. And so through treatment and recovery housing, it gives us that opportunity to also kind of bounce back and create a new identity for ourselves. So we're going to move in. There's some, these are different types. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I just wanted to kind of tell everybody what the different types of substance use treatment are. There's a lot of acronyms out there, and our industry uses a lot of jargon, and I think that it can get pretty confusing sometimes. And so if you don't know what, if you have a son or daughter who's, 19 years old and you just found out that they have a really bad alcohol problem and they've been doing cocaine, and you're like, now what? I've never had to deal with this in my entire life. I don't know where to go or who to talk to, and everybody's telling me all these things. I thought it'd be useful just to do a basic kind of, this is what things are. So most of our industry follows the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, there at the top. And ASAM has basically given us these guidelines for how people should be and which level of care, what kind of symptoms they're experiencing, because we know that addiction, substance use disorder is a disease that the brain actually changes whenever somebody has been using drugs. And so anyways, so this helps us do it. So there's 6 different levels of care that you see there on the screen. I'm going to go through each one. The first one is medically managed intensive inpatient services. This is what people just think of as just going to the hospital or detox, right? So it's 24-hour supervision. Everybody that's supervising me is a medical professional. They're not a social worker like me. They're not a peers person. It's not somebody from a 12-step group. It's actually like a medical professional. That's really, really intense. It's for people that have acute medical symptoms like liver failure, a heart attack, something they're hospitalized because of their drug use, or they're withdrawing because of they're having acute symptoms because the lack of the substance, right? So detox is primarily for individuals who have been using large amounts of alcohol or benzodiazepines. The other drugs aren't as medically dangerous. If you're just going to stop cold turkey, but they don't feel good and they're not going to be fun, but they're not as dangerous for you. So that's detox rehab. Then we go into residential treatment, which people call rehab a lot of times. Again, 24-hour supervision, but it's not all medical staff all the time. A lot of peer support, a lot of entry-level, kind of unskilled, quote-unquote, workers. So we've got techs is what we call a lot of people that work basically in the night shift and stuff like that. So somebody that's in this level of care is going to treatment, and they're living at the same building, the same location, right? Average length of stay is about 30 days. Some programs go 3 to 6 months. You get 6 to 8 hours of treatment per day, 5 days a week. They're usually off on the weekends, but they stay out there. They don't leave or go anywhere. There's all different kinds too. There's co-ed, there's gender specific, there's trauma informed, there's trauma focused, there's ones that deal with disordered eating. There's all different kinds. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to do your research. Talk to somebody like one of us. We'd be happy to help walk you through that process. The next step is partial hospitalization. It looks a lot like residential treatment, honestly, except it's done in the outpatient setting. So patients can come and go. It's still 6 to 8 hours, which typically 6 hours a day, but 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's the exact same amount of treatment time as residential treatment. It's just that you don't live here. You can go to work. 6 hours a day is a lot, so it's kind of difficult to hold a job. But this is for somebody who it might not be possible for them to go to work, or for them to miss out on work or school, or they have a family they need to take care of, a single mother, right? It might be really difficult for her to go to residential treatment for 30 days and just find somewhere to take her kids. This option is appropriate for her because she can come during the day. If she can find a daycare to watch her kids for that period of time during the day, she can go home to take care of them and go back and forth. The other big thing about PHP and the next one, IOP, that's a really big why we really believe in this level of care, and why it's it's our starting out level of care that we do at Stages of Recovery, is because when you combine it with the transitional housing, it mimics residential treatment, so it's really intensive, but you still have the opportunity to go out. You still go to Walmart and buy your own groceries and see what it's like to walk past the alcohol. And then you get to come back and you could talk to your counselor about that, and you could talk to your house manager about that, and you could talk to your sponsor about that, and you have all these people that are surrounding you, and you're getting real life experiences that you're trying to cope with at the same time. Whereas in residential treatment, you're not getting a lot of those real life experiences. You're just learning how to cope and hopefully applying that when you get out. So the next step is intensive outpatient program, IOP, almost the same as PHP. It's just a little bit less. So it's about 3 hours per day, 3 to 5 days a week. So it averages out to about 9 to 15 hours a week. Very similar again to PHP, come and go. This is the time when people usually get a job in our program. So you can usually work like our program 6 to 9 Monday through Friday. So you could work 8 to 5, come over here 6 to 9, still get intensive services, still see your therapist, see your psychiatrist, come to group, do all the stuff that you need to, but also hold on to a job, go to school, maintain your familial responsibilities, things like that. The last step basically that I'm going to go over is outpatient services. This is basically just a nice way of saying you could pick and choose whatever of all the stuff that you just heard about, you can pick and choose and do it here. So typically our clients see their counselor, their individual therapist, a couple times a month, come to group once a week. It's just a way to check in and keep that going. I think about it like this. If somebody has type 2 diabetes, they likely got that from their behavior, their habits, the way they ate food, and the inability to manage insulin levels, right? And so if you can't take your insulin like you're supposed to, manage your blood sugar, do the things that you're supposed to do, eventually you're going to have to go to the hospital. That's the only step, which is rehab or detox, right? Residential treatment. And then if you're able to manage your insulin levels and you're able to manage your blood sugar and do the things that you're supposed to do for your type 2 diabetes, manage your diet, all those things, that food can be very addictive, right? If you're able to manage those things, then you go see the doctor, and you only see the doctor once a month for a little while, and then you see the doctor once every 3 months, and you see the doctor once every 6 months. You get the idea, right? And so that's what we're doing here. We're taking it and we're going really intensive. It's a medical problem. We need to get it treated right away. We need to handle the symptoms immediately. And then once you prove that you don't need as much support, then we can start to stretch those intervals out, and you don't have to come see the doctor as much, right? You can take your insulin, you can manage your diet, you're doing a good job. So that's the last. There's one more, but I'm going to pretty much skip over it. It's basically prevention. So we'll go on to recovery housing. Steve?
So there's several different types of recovery housings, and I'm going to start from level 4 to level 3, 2, 1, most intensive to the least intensive. Basically, I think like the easiest way to explain it is going to be a little bit of a mixture of cost and the different types of services that are involved in it. So a therapeutic setting is, I guess like the best way to explain a therapeutic setting would be it's more expensive. Insurance typically doesn't cover this level of care. There is some clinical oversight that can be a part of it. So they can have some counselors to be on site. They can have some, they can transport them back and forth to IOP and PHP. They can do things like that in a therapeutic setting, but it's mostly like, I guess like the best way to describe it would be highly structured. So they're going to have, the day is going to be planned out from like 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. The day is going to be planned out. They're going to have something to do every single day. It's typically a lot more expensive. So it's anywhere from $2,500 to, I've heard of them being like $10,000 a month, where insurance can pick up some of that cost, but the majority of it, it's gonna include food. Some of them are gonna include personal trainers. So if you want somebody to be watched over 24 hours a day, and they're already out of residential setting, then a therapeutic community is what you're looking for. You want to go to the next slide? The next one is transitional supportive housing. That's kind of where Stages falls into. It's typically a little bit less expensive. It's based more out of accountability than it is out of structure. So transitional supportive group or supportive housing is going to be, hey, these are the 5 or 6 rules that you need to accomplish on a regular basis. These are the places that you need to be, and make sure you get these tasks finished. Go out there and get it done. Some of them are more expensive than others. They typically range down rather than up. I've heard of some that are probably close to like the 2,500 range, but typically they're going to go for like $1,200 to $1,500 a month, depending on where you're at. So if you're like Center Austin or Center Dallas, or I don't think Oklahoma City has anything like that, to be honest with you, but then you're going to be, it's going to be up there in the 1,500, 1,200 range. And that's not going to include the clinical costs associated with it. Now, sometimes they'll transport them to other clinical services, or sometimes they'll be connected like they are here at Stages. Some of the bigger things to consider is on level 4, it's completely governed by the organization. So the organization has complete control over times, rules, structure, all that other jazz. Level 3 is going to be kind of a mixture. It's going to be a blend of organizational structure. Like the organization's going to manage a lot of the differences, but the individuals are going to have some opportunity to manage themselves too. So the house managers are typically paid in both of those scenarios. They have a lot of support staff associated with them. So there's going to be several paid house managers. There's going to be recovery coaches involved. The difference between the two, though, level 4 and level 3, is level 3 creates an opportunity for somebody to build their own identity and gives them autonomy in being able to make their own decisions, whether they be good decisions or bad decisions. And if it's done correctly, when the bad decisions happen, they can get managed. And basically, we have an opportunity to sit down with the client and just guide them and say, hey, this is where you made a poor decision. This is how you can correct that in the future. I would say the negatives are basically that, like when you don't have somebody watching you 24 hours a day, and you want to make some poor decisions, you can make poor decisions. There's often times on the phone when I'm talking to parents, I'll tell them, hey, listen, your son is more than welcome to come here, but no, like if he wants to go to the liquor store, he can go to the liquor store. Like we're not going to stop that from happening. We're going to catch him if it happens, but that's the downside to anything below a level 4. I think the challenge with the level 4 though is you're basically you're biding your time for that opportunity to be presented later in the future. So you want to go on to level 3, Cole? Level 3 is basically sober living. So sober living can have a couple of different ways that they can be managed. We'll talk about that in the level 1 in addition to, but consider level 2 is more, it's probably like what you would consider like a sober dorm to be. So there's no like direct oversight. There's not a lot of people that are watching them. The people that are going here probably don't need a tremendous amount of attention. Maybe they're stepping out of a level 4 or a level 3 transitional housing or program, something along those lines, where they just need some additional low level accountability where, hey, these are the rules. You're going to get drug tested occasionally, and just do what you need to do. Typically in these scenarios, you might have an offsite owner. So somebody might own the property, but they're not really the ones that are managing it. So you might be paying one guy, and then somebody else who's more involved with your child or loved one is operating it. So there's kind of a disconnect with both of those. I think the positives is it's a really great transition back into independence, like complete independence. The negative would be that it's not the best place to go to right after residential treatment. There's a tremendous amount of freedom, and there's not a whole lot of oversight. It could be a good place for somebody who's been to 5 or 6 treatments, and they're really, really ready, and they just got out of a 90-day rehab program. That's a possibility. Let's do the next slide. So level 1, I would say, is Oxford House. They're going to be the least expensive option. They're also going to have the least amount of structure and oversight. Oxford houses are basically, they're democratically ran. So if I was to live in an Oxford house and Cole was going to live in an Oxford house, and anybody else is going to live in an Oxford house, then there has to be a president, there has to be a treasurer, there has to be a secretary, and then we all vote on who gets to come in next. So if Derek wanted to come in, Cole and I and another person would have to vote Derek to come in. Derek would have to move up the ranks and hopefully start pitching in and doing the things that he's supposed to do. If not, then he can be voted out by anybody. So there could be personality conflicts. You could run into a situation where the whole house is kind of sick, so they're all kind of using together, and there's not a whole lot of outside governance to manage that. So it eventually gets shut down because rumors fly. But then there's just a little bit of, there's just not as much attention to detail, I would say. Food and transportation aren't provided. Nobody's paid. It's 100% paid by the organization or by that particular house, and it's fairly inexpensive. So if you get into a really good Oxford house, they're amazing. They're very, very productive. If you don't, then you just need to make sure you find one, because they're not productive at that point. Next slide, Cole. So this is really for parents who have maybe teenagers or kids that are, maybe 24, 25 range. The biggest thing that worked for me was my mother learning to say no. That was the hardest thing for me to take, and I was really upset that she learned how to say that very early. She was not willing to pay for anything for me, and she made me work for pretty much everything. I mean, she set me up when I needed to be set it up, and then she pushed me off and she said, "Go figure it out." Cole, you can jump in on any of these that you feel are necessary. Another thing is, for my mother, she was very boundary oriented, which I guess kind of leads into her being able to say no very well. Like, a lot of the times parents will set a boundary, and then the kid will go and push the boundary. They'll test it to see how far they can get that fence to lean, and then next thing you know, the fence just falls over completely. There's a lot of times in our program where a kid will call the parent because they're frustrated about maybe they're not getting their way or they're being held accountable, and they'll get a phone call from the kid, and the kid's like, well, this and that, and the parents don't call and try to find the other side of the story. They just say, oh, well, maybe you can come home. And then that's basically all you're doing is you're just kind of cracking the door open. And the next thing that's going to come through that is a foot of the kiddo, and there's not going to be any shutting it down. So, Cole, you want to pop in on the next couple here?
Sure. Mine's really similar to Steve, although we looked a lot different. He went to a different program than I did. I'm a graduate of drug court, and so long-term treatment has been the key to my 13 years of sobriety. Even though drug court treatment looks a lot different than the way we've talked about treatment so far, just having somebody there holding me accountable, for over a year, was kind of the big decision maker for me. It kind of helped me to toe the line, and I lived, actually, my parents had a kind of makeshift sober living at their house here in Lubbock, and my dad basically just told me, look, you're not going to listen to me, and you're not going to listen to my mom. You're not going to listen to my wife here, your mom, but it sounds like you'll listen to the judge. So I'm just going to start telling the judge if you're not going to do the things that we ask you to do. And I stopped pretty quickly. And so he learned, both my parents learned the boundaries thing, just like Steve was talking about, and, made some hard decisions. And I doubt that they really wanted to tell the judge about me coming home late at night. And then having me sit in jail for 3 days as a result of them snitching on me. But it was a thing that saved my life in the long run. So I think that those are, a lot of these are all the same for me as they were for Steve. And I don't know if you got more. Steve, you're muted.
Sorry. No, I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me was and I think that's the hardest thing for parents in general, because I think what I see most parents, and I don't have any kids, Cole has kids, but I think what parents operate out of the most is fear in this particular arena. And I'm sure my mom was scared to death. I remember I had a conversation with a parent here recently, and she asked me, she said, "How did your mom do it?" And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure she cried her eyes out for many, many nights. She had no clue what to do with me." But the Oklahoma County figured it out pretty swiftly how to deal with me. And after that, things starting to straighten up for me a little bit. I think there's only a couple of options for those who are suffering with addiction or alcoholism or whatever they might be battling. Is you can get thrown in jail, you can die, or you can go to treatment, and that's it. And I think it's really scary for any parents to think that that's their only option. But I think what it all comes down to is most of the time parents have a 50-50 shot. And the more they support and encourage the children to make the hard decisions and get away from the old friends and challenge the way that the kiddo is thinking, the better chance they have. It's just really counterintuitive to what they think is probably the right decision. Wouldn't you agree, Cole?
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. I always use the analogy, like whenever I started doing this before I was even married, and now I've gotten married and had kids, and granted they're young, but I can in no way begin to really empathize with what parents of my clients are going through, of our clients are going through. I like to think I can, but there's no way. Because, and really whenever it comes down to it, I think to myself, I can't even, it's hard for me to say no to chocolate milk at 8:30 at night. So I have no idea what it feels like to tell my kid, no, you can't come back in this house. But at the same time, I do know that sometimes those hard decisions that we have to make, like, you know, it's kind of trivializing it. Obviously, saying no to chocolate milk is the best thing I can do for my kid at 8 o'clock at night, right? And so learning that other people, even though it feels weird sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily feel like the most loving thing that I can do, taking that advice from somebody else, and knowing that that's what's worked for other people, even if it doesn't feel right, is the way to go a lot of times. So I think we're done. We're gonna move over to the Q&A section, which Derek's gonna jump in here probably. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. I don't know what happened to my hair while you guys were talking. There must have been a stiff breeze through my dining room or something. I don't know. We're going to switch over to the live Q&A on Zoom. So if you're watching on Facebook, I have posted the link, the meeting ID, the meeting password in the comments section of the live webinar. If you're watching in the current Zoom room, I have also sent that to you in a chat. So click over there right now, give me about 10 seconds, and I'll see everybody there, and I'll see you gentlemen there.